My name is Diana Mercer. I am 38 years old and I am a forensic accountant, which means I spend my working life tracing money. Not earning it, not managing it, not advising people how to grow it, but following it backward and forward through ledgers and shell accounts and charitable trusts and family limited partnerships, until I can tell you precisely where it came from, where it went, who touched it on the way, and whether any of those people had the right to do so. I have done this work for 11 years. I have testified in federal court 4 times. I have watched people who were very certain they had hidden something learn in the specific language of depositions and certified financial records that they had not. I have watched families fracture along fault lines that were always there, but that money, when it moves in the wrong direction, has a way of making suddenly and permanently visible. I know the difference between a family that has money and a family that is organized around money, and I know with the professional precision of someone who has seen both in crisis, that the second kind is more dangerous than the first. I say all of this before I tell you what my aunt said to my daughter on Christmas Eve, because the order matters in the same way that the order of entries in a financial ledger matters. What my Aunt Constance believed she was doing, when she looked at my 16-year-old daughter Ava and said what she said in front of 12 members of our family, was exercising the specific authority of the person who controls the money. What she did not account for, what no one in my family has ever fully accounted for in 38 years of watching me be the quiet one who handles things, was who was in the room with her when she said it. She thought she was looking at a niece. She was looking at a forensic accountant who had spent 11 years learning to dismantle exactly the kind of financial architecture that was the only thing between Constance and a conversation she had been avoiding for 15 years. The gap between those two assessments is the entire story. The gap is where everything happened. Let me tell you about Ava first, because she is the reason this story is the story it is, and because no one who was in that dining room on Christmas Eve had the right to say to her what was said, and I want you to understand exactly who she is before I describe what happened to her. Ava is 16 years old and she is the daughter of my first marriage to a man named Trevor Sandoval, who was a good man and a present father until he died of pancreatic cancer when Ava was 9 years old. She was not destroyed by losing him, which is the remarkable thing about Ava. She was altered by it, in the way that a bone heals differently after a fracture, stronger in the break point and more sensitive to pressure elsewhere. She became at 9 a child who understood that the world was not organized around fairness, and she responded to this understanding not with bitterness but with a kind of determined clarity about what she valued and what she was willing to spend her energy on. By 16, she was the kind of person who made deliberate choices about the kind of person she was becoming. She had a 4.2 GPA at Centennial High School in Austin. She had been accepted to the Texas Young Scholars Program in Applied Mathematics, a program that accepts 31 students from across the state per year, and that requires a portfolio, 2 teacher recommendations, a problem-solving competition, and a personal statement. She was in her 2nd year of it. She had also, over the preceding summer, taught herself Python using a free curriculum from MIT OpenCourseWare, and built a small data visualization tool that her math teacher had called in writing the most technically sophisticated independent student project he had encountered in 17 years of teaching. Ava is also a quiet person. This is the thing about her that the people in my family who have known her since birth have consistently misread as a deficit. She does not fill rooms with her personality, she observes, she processes before she speaks, and when she speaks she says exactly what she means, which is a trait she inherited from Trevor and which I have always privately found extraordinary in a 16-year-old. She is not the kind of child who performs her accomplishments for the people in a room. She is the kind of child who has accomplishments and considers them private, not because she is ashamed of them but because she has not yet encountered a situation that required her to deploy them. Christmas Eve was the situation. The situation found her first and I found the situation second, and what happened between those 2 moments is the story. My family, my mother's side, is organized around my grandmother Evelyn Mercer, who is 79 years old and who built with her late husband Gerald a real estate and property management company in the Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex that had, by the time Gerald died in 2008, accumulated an asset base that I will not give you an exact number on because it is not my number to give. What I will tell you is that it is substantial enough that my grandmother's estate plan, which I know about because I am a forensic accountant, and because 3 years ago my grandmother asked me in confidence to review it, has been the organizing principle of my mother's family for at least 2 decades. There are 5 children: my mother Carol, her sister Constance, her brother Raymond, her sister Dolores, and her brother Patrick. They are spread across Texas and they see each other at the occasions that the family calendar has always required, which means Thanksgiving, Christmas, and the annual summer gathering in July at the lake house in Lake Travis that Gerald bought in 1989, and that has been for 30 years the physical location of the family's sense of itself. The lake house is also, not coincidentally, one of the assets that appears in my grandmother's estate plan with a specific and potentially contentious distribution instruction that I reviewed 3 years ago and have not discussed with anyone except my grandmother. Constance is 62 years old and she is the oldest child, and she has, for as long as I have been old enough to observe the dynamics of the family, operated under the conviction that being the oldest meant something specific about authority. She was a real estate attorney for 25 years. She retired 7 years ago and since then has directed her organizational energy toward the family, which means in practice toward managing how the family's money flows, who is adjacent to it, who is approved of, and who is considered to be making good choices. She does not have children. She was married once briefly in her 30s to a man named Paul who left after 4 years, and the family consensus is that the leaving was mutual and the reasons were not discussed. She has always directed toward the children of her siblings the specific attention of a person who has decided that other people's children are a project, that they require shaping, that she has the wisdom for the shaping, and that the shaping is a form of care. Ava has been one of her projects since Ava was old enough to be assessed. The assessment had never been favorable, and the unfavorable assessment had always been communicated in the specific register of people who believe they are being helpful when they are being cruel. I want to be precise about Constance's relationship with Ava over the years, because the Christmas Eve moment did not emerge from nowhere. It was the latest expression of a pattern that had been building since Ava was 9 years old and I had brought her to her first family Christmas as a widow with a child, and Constance had looked at this quiet, observant child in her chair at the table and said the first time and directly to my mother where she believed I could not hear, "She's very internal, isn't she? That can be a disadvantage." I had heard it, Ava had not, I had filed it. Over the subsequent 7 years, the assessments had continued with the specific regularity of someone who was checking in on a project that was not developing according to specifications. When Ava was 11 and reading adult-level nonfiction at the Christmas dinner table instead of socializing, Constance had said across the table that reading at family gatherings was antisocial. When Ava was 13 and had opted out of the family talent show that Constance organized every Christmas Eve to demonstrate instead that she had been working on an essay about climate modeling that her teacher had submitted to a regional competition, Constance had said it was a shame she didn't have more fun. When Ava was 14 and had brought her laptop to Thanksgiving to finish a coding project that was due the following week, Constance had said to the room that children who couldn't put their technology away at family gatherings were going to have trouble in real relationships. I had absorbed each of these moments with the professional equanimity of someone who has learned to document rather than respond, and I had talked to Ava privately each time, and Ava had received each conversation with the specific stillness that she had developed as a child who understood earlier than most that not every person's opinion of her required her response. Then Christmas Eve, this year. The family gathered at Constance's house in Southlake, which is where Constance moved after her retirement and which is a house that has been organized every December into a demonstration of Constance's aesthetic authority. 12 people around the dining table. My grandmother Evelyn, my mother Carol and her husband John, Constance alone at the head of her end, Raymond and his wife Pamela and their 2 college-age sons Marcus and Drew, Dolers and her husband Frank, Patrick and his girlfriend Sylvie who was meeting the family for the first time, and me and Ava. The dinner itself had gone the way dinners in this family go, the conversation rooted through the subjects that are safe, which means the real estate market and the weather and Raymond's new truck and Marcus's law school applications, and a moderate amount of grandmother-directed reminiscence about Gerald. I had been watching Ava across the table and she had been eating her dinner and responding when addressed and being in every observable way exactly herself, quiet, present, not performing anything, doing the thing she has always done, which is listen to people carefully and speak when she has something to say. The gifts happened after dinner the way they always do, in the living room while Constance's playlist of instrumental Christmas music filled the house with the sound of an institutional event rather than a family one. The gift exchange has its own choreography in this family, an order determined by age, oldest first, which means my grandmother, then Constance, then Raymond, then my mother, then Dolers, then Patrick, then the spouses, then the children. When it came to Ava, Constance produced a card-sized envelope and set it on the coffee table in front of Ava with the specific deliberateness of someone who has decided this gift is going to be accompanied by a speech. I noticed the deliberateness and I placed it in my awareness the way I place anomalies in a financial record, not reacting but noting, setting aside, continuing to observe. Ava opened the envelope. Inside was a gift card to Barnes & Noble for $25. This by itself was not remarkable except in the context of what Constance had given the other grandchildren generation members of the family that evening. Marcus had received a check for $3,000 toward law school expenses, Drew had received a check for $1,500, Patrick's girlfriend Sylvie had received a cashmere scarf from a brand I recognized as costing approximately $400, purchased specifically to make a first impression. The arithmetic was visible to me immediately because I work in arithmetic. I did not say anything. I watched Ava look at the Barnes & Noble gift card with the careful neutrality of a person who has been in this dynamic long enough to know how to receive it. Then Constance spoke. She spoke in the tone of a woman who has prepared this and who believes in the moment of delivery that she is performing an act of love. She said she had thought carefully about what to give Ava this year, and that she had decided a small but practical gift was the right choice, because practical gifts were what you gave people who needed to learn the value of things. She said she had been watching Ava for several years now and she wanted to say something directly, because she believed in being direct with young people rather than allowing them to develop false impressions of their circumstances. She said that Ava was a very quiet girl with very particular interests that were, she was sorry to say, not going to serve her well in the world. She said the world rewarded people who were engaging, who were personable, who could work a room. She said that in her experience of 30 years as a professional, as a real estate attorney who had built relationships that were the entire foundation of her practice, the people who sat in corners with their books and their computers and their internal lives were the people who did not make it in any field that required other people to believe in them. She said she told Ava this not to be unkind, but because she was the only person in Ava's life who appeared willing to be honest with her since her mother. And here she looked at me with the expression I had been receiving from her for the entire 16 years of Ava's life. Her mother had always been too protective of Ava to give her the kind of direct assessment that would actually help her. She said she genuinely hoped Ava would take this to heart, because she was 16 now, which was not a child, and the habits of personality that you allowed to calcify at 16 were the habits you carried into adulthood, and the habit of withdrawing from people was a habit that would make Ava's life smaller than it needed to be. She said all of this in 2.5 minutes while 12 people sat in a living room decorated with tasteful white lights and instrumental Christmas music, and watched my daughter receive a speech about her inadequacy wrapped as care. I want to describe what happened in my body when Constance finished speaking, because the body part is the true part and I have been deliberate about not pretending it wasn't there. There is a temperature change that happens when you hear someone reduce your child. It is not the hot anger of the immediate impulse, I know that temperature, and it was not that. It was something colder and more specific, the temperature of something that has been gathering for 7 years across every dinner table and every quiet comment and every carefully managed family occasion, and that has now in front of 12 people been said in full and cannot be unsaid. I looked at Ava. She was looking at the coffee table. She had the specific expression that I recognized from every time Constance had said something about her in her presence since she was 9 years old, the expression of a child who has developed, out of pure necessity, the ability to receive cruelty as if it were information, to process it without performing a reaction, to wait it out. She was doing that. My 16-year-old daughter, who had built a data visualization tool from scratch using MIT's OpenCourseware, who had been accepted to a program that accepts 31 students from the entire state of Texas, who had a 4.2 grade point average, and a math teacher who had written the most technically sophisticated assessment he had encountered in 17 years. My daughter was sitting on a sofa on Christmas Eve receiving a speech about how her internal nature was going to make her life small, and she was absorbing it the way she absorbed things, which is to say completely and without a visible seam. I did not react in the room. I want you to understand this precisely, because the decision not to react in the room was not passivity. It was the same decision I make when I open a file that contains something significant. You do not react to evidence. You document it, you understand it fully. You assess the full scope of what you are looking at before you decide what the situation requires. I said evenly and without additional commentary that we appreciated Constance's thoughts. I said it in the voice I use when a deposition witness says something that I intend to return to with considerable precision at a later moment. I squeezed Ava's hand once. She squeezed back, which is something we have always done, the single squeeze that means, I have you and we will talk about this when we are somewhere that talking about it makes sense. Then I sat in Constance's living room for 45 more minutes, and I watched Constance direct the rest of the evening with the satisfied competence of a person who believes she has done something useful. On the drive home, Ava and I were quiet for the first 10 minutes, which is how we are with things that require space before they can be spoken. Then Ava said, without looking at me, she means well. I said, I know you know that isn't entirely true. She was quiet for another moment, then she said, she's wrong though, right? And there was something in the way she said it, not the certainty I would have expected from her, but a question, genuine and slightly younger than 16, the specific vulnerability of a person who has heard something enough times that they have started, against their better judgment, to wonder whether it might contain a truth. I said, she is wrong about everything she said. I said it in the flat, certain register of someone speaking from data rather than comfort, because Ava has always known the difference and she needed to hear it from the data register and not the comfort register. I said, but I want you to hear specifically and with evidence why she is wrong, and I want you to hear it from someone who isn't me, because you are old enough to understand that my assessment of you is not objective and you deserve an objective assessment. She looked at me then. She said, what are you going to do? I said, I am going to do what I do, which is follow the information where it goes and document what I find. She was quiet for another moment, then she said, okay. In the way she says okay, the Ava okay, that means I am placing this in your hands and I trust that you understand what you are holding. What I did the week after Christmas was not a dramatic intervention. It was the thing I do applied to the situation that required it. I opened a folder, not a metaphorical folder, a literal one, a new manila folder in my home office that I labeled with a date and a subject, and I began building what I think of as a record of the real. The record of the real is what I build when I need a situation to be understood on the basis of what actually exists rather than on the basis of what a particular narrative has been insisting is true. I have built it in fraud cases and in estate disputes and in corporate divorces where one party has been describing a version of events so consistently that the people in the room have almost started to believe it. I knew how to build it. I had the professional habit of building it. And I had in this case something that many of my professional cases do not have: comprehensive and unambiguous documentation of the subject's actual capabilities, assembled entirely by parties with no stake in the outcome. I contacted Ava's math teacher, Mr. James Ackafer, by email and asked if he would be willing to write a brief formal assessment of Ava's academic and intellectual capabilities, framed not as a recommendation letter but as a professional evaluation of a student's work. I told him the context honestly and fully because Mr. Ackafer is the kind of teacher who deserves honesty and who will not use the truth irresponsibly. He wrote back the same day. He said he would be honored. The assessment he produced, 2 pages, single-spaced on school letterhead, described Ava's data visualization project in technical terms that left no interpretive room. She had independently implemented a multivariable regression model using publicly available economic data from the Federal Reserve Economic Data System, known as FRED, and built an interactive visualization layer in Python that updated dynamically as inputs changed. He said the conceptual sophistication of the project was consistent with second-year undergraduate statistics coursework. He said he had submitted it with Ava's permission to a regional STEM educators review board whose annual showcase she had been invited to present at in March. He said he had been teaching mathematics for 17 years, and that he had encountered 3 students in that time whose independent intellectual curiosity was at the level Ava's was. He named one of them a student from 7 years ago who was currently completing a doctoral program in applied mathematics at Carnegie Mellon. He said Ava was one of the 3. He put that in writing on school letterhead, dated and signed. I called the director of the Texas Young Scholars Program, a woman named Dr. Patricia Voss, and asked whether she would be willing to provide a brief statement about Ava's standing in the program and the typical outcomes for students who complete it. Dr. Voss said she was glad I called because she had been meaning to reach out about Ava anyway, since Ava had been identified by the program's faculty committee as a candidate for the program's annual research fellowship, which provides a summer placement at the University of Texas at Austin's Computational Mathematics Department for 3 students per year from across the current cohort. She said they were preparing to send me a formal invitation. She said, and I recorded this in my notes with the specific precision of someone who knows that the right sentence in the right place changes the weight of a record. She said that Ava had one of the most precise analytical minds she had encountered in the program's 12-year history, and that the students who came out of the program with Ava's profile typically entered top-tier undergraduate programs and moved into research and high-impact professional careers, and that the program's outcome data, which they published annually, would show me exactly what she meant. I asked her to include all of that in a brief formal letter. She said she would have it to me within the week. I also did something that was not professional standard practice, but that felt in this case precisely correct. I sat down with Ava on a Saturday morning in January, at our kitchen table, with coffee for me and the chamomile tea from the Harney & Sons Classic Collection tin she keeps on the second shelf because she has had the same morning tea routine since she was 13, and I asked her to walk me through her Python project from the beginning. Not because I needed to evaluate it, I had Mr. Ackafer's assessment, but because I wanted to watch her explain it, wanted to see what she looked like when she was doing the thing Constance had called small and internal and disconnected from the world. She opened her laptop, she pulled up the project. She began explaining the regression model with the specific focused energy of a person who is completely in their element, who is not performing for a room, who is sharing a thing they care about with someone they trust, and she was extraordinary. She talked for 45 minutes and I asked technical questions, and she answered them with precision and occasionally stopped herself and said, "Wait, I can show you something better," and opened a new window and showed me, and the 45 minutes became an hour and a quarter. And at the end of it I sat at my kitchen table and felt something I have not felt in a professional context in 11 years, which is the clean, certain knowledge that I was looking at something genuinely remarkable being produced by a person who had no idea that it was remarkable because no one in her daily life had told her with enough specificity and credibility for it to land. What I built in the folder over 3 weeks was this: Mr. Ackafer's 2-page assessment, Dr. Voss's letter from the Texas Young Scholars Program, which arrived on a Thursday and which contained the formal invitation to the Summer Research Fellowship at UT Austin, a printout of the program's published outcome data, which showed that 87% of program completers entered universities ranked in the top 50 nationally, and that the program's fellowship alumni included a current faculty member at MIT, 2 published researchers in computational biology, and the founding CTO of a data analytics firm that had been acquired in 2021 for a number I recognized immediately from financial news coverage because the number was substantial. I printed Ava's most recent transcript from the Centennial High School student portal, cumulative GPA 4.2, 11 AP courses in progress or completed, no grade below a 93 in any of them. I printed the original confirmation letter from the Young Scholars Program from 2 years ago, when Ava had been accepted, with the admission rate printed at the bottom of the page, 31 students selected from 412 applicants. I printed the email from the Regional STEM Educators Review Board confirming Ava's invitation to present at their March showcase. I put everything in the folder behind a single cover page that said simply, and in the factual register I use for all documents of record, assessment of Ava Sandoval, age 16, and below that a factual record compiled January by Diana Mercer. But the folder was not the end of it, the folder was one piece. The other piece had to do with Constance herself, and with the specific architecture of authority that Constance had been operating within for 20 years and that I had reviewed 3 years ago in my grandmother's estate documents. I want to be careful here about what I say and what I do not say, because the estate plan is my grandmother's private document and my professional review of it was conducted in confidence. What I will tell you is this: the authority that Constance had spent 2 decades exercising over this family, the authority to assess, to determine who was making good choices and who wasn't, to position herself as the family's senior advisor on matters of character and worth, was an authority that rested, in the last analysis, on a particular assumption about what her position in my grandmother's estate would eventually be. And that assumption, based on documents I had reviewed in confidence, was not accurate. It was not even close to accurate. Constance had been operating for 20 years under a set of beliefs about what would eventually belong to her and to the decisions she made on behalf of the family, and those beliefs did not match the documents. I had not told anyone this because it was not my information to share, and because it had not, until Christmas Eve, become the kind of information that the situation required me to know I had. I called my grandmother Evelyn the first week of January. I called her the way I always call her, directly, without going through my mother, because my grandmother and I have always had a separate line of communication that the rest of the family has chosen not to examine too closely. My grandmother is 79 years old, and she has the specific clarity of a person who has lived long enough to have had all of her illusions corrected by time, and she does not require diplomatic framing. I told her what had happened at Christmas. I told her about the $25 gift card. I told her about Constance's speech. I told her about the drive home and the moment in the car when Ava had said, with a crack in her certainty, "She's wrong though, right?" My grandmother was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said, "I wasn't there." I said, "I know," she said, "but I've been watching Constance manage people for 30 years and I know exactly what that looks like." I said, "I know you do." She said, "What are you going to do?" I said I was going to give Ava something more durable than a reaction. I said I had a folder. My grandmother said, "Bring the folder." I said I would. I drove to my grandmother's house in Plano the following Saturday without Ava, because this was a conversation between 2 adults who needed to be honest with each other about several things. My grandmother was in her reading chair by the window when I arrived, the way she is always in her reading chair on Saturday mornings, with her coffee and the Dallas Morning News and the reading glasses she refuses to upgrade even though the prescription is 2 years old. I sat at the table across from her and I gave her the folder. She read every page. She read slowly, the way she reads everything, completely, with full attention, the way Gerald had taught her to read a contract when they were building the business together and she had made the mistake once of skimming. She was quiet through all of it. When she finished, she set the folder on the table and looked at it for a moment and then looked at me. She said, "This child has been told she is small." I said, "Yes." She said, "For how long?" I said, "Since she was 9, since Trevor died, since she first sat at a family table as the quiet one." My grandmother was quiet again for a long time. Then she said, "I want to see Ava." I said I would bring her the following weekend. Ava and my grandmother have always had a relationship that existed separately from the family structure. A relationship conducted mostly in the specific language of people who are interested in the same things, which in their case was chess and numbers, and the particular quality of conversation that happens when an old person and a young person are both genuinely curious and do not require social performance from each other. My grandmother had taught Ava chess at age 8, and Ava had been beating her consistently since 12, which my grandmother had announced at the following Thanksgiving with more pride than she announced most things. I drove Ava to Plano the following Saturday. I told Ava that her great-grandmother wanted to see her and that I was going to sit in the kitchen and read while they talked, because I did not want to be in the room for what I expected to happen. Ava looked at me sideways in the car the way she does when she suspects she is being managed towards something and then decides she is okay with it. She said, "Does Grandma Evelyn know about Christmas?" I said yes. She was quiet. Then she said, "Is she upset?" I said, "She is on your side." Ava was quiet the rest of the drive. I sat in my grandmother's kitchen for an hour and 40 minutes. I heard very little of what was said in the reading room. My grandmother's house is the kind of house built in the 1980s that had real walls and real insulation, and conversations stayed where they were put. What I heard was the voice of my grandmother, low, direct, unhurried, and Ava's voice, which gradually over the first 20 minutes moved from the careful register she uses with authority figures to the register she uses when she has decided a person is worth her full attention. I heard her laugh once, the real laugh, the Ava laugh that sounds like something released rather than something performed. I heard my grandmother say, loud enough to reach the kitchen once, "Read that part to me again," which meant Ava had brought the laptop and was showing her the project. At the 1 hour 40 mark, Ava came into the kitchen. Her eyes were slightly red at the edges in the way they go when she has been working hard to manage something that had more content than she was expecting. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table. She said, "She told me about the fellowship." I said I knew. She said she was going to do something. "What did she say she was going to do?" I said, "Whatever she does is her decision and her information to give you. I am only in charge of the folder." Ava looked at me for a moment in the specific way she has when she is taking something in that is larger than she expected. She said, "The folder." I said, "The folder." She nodded once the way she nods when she has decided to trust a specific person with a specific thing and is releasing it entirely. 3 weeks after that Saturday, my grandmother called me on a Tuesday evening. She said she had made some decisions and wanted me to know about them before they were communicated to the family. She said this was not a reaction to Christmas. She had been thinking about this for some time and Christmas had clarified a timeline. She said she had met with her estate attorney, a man named Richard Holloway who has handled her documents for 22 years and who I know professionally by reputation as someone who does things correctly and does not make documentation errors. She said she had amended the trust. She did not give me the full details of the amendment because it was her document and her information, but she told me 2 things. The first was that she had established as a separate specific instrument under the trust an educational endowment for Ava of $100,000, accessible for educational and research-related expenses beginning immediately: tuition, program fees, research tools, conference travel, whatever Ava's academic work required. The instrument was named the Ava Sandoval Mercer Educational Endowment. My grandmother had insisted on the full name. She said it was important that Ava's name was on something formally in a legal document that would exist beyond both of them, because the specific cruelty of being told you are small is that there is nothing in the world to show that says otherwise until someone makes something. The second thing she told me was that she had revised the trust distribution structure in a way that corrected an assumption that several family members had been operating under for some time. She did not say Constance's name. She did not need to. The family meeting happened in February. My grandmother called it herself, called each sibling individually and said she wanted to review her estate plan with all of them present, which she had been intending to do for some time, and that she wanted everyone at her house on the second Sunday of February. I was not included in this call. I was told about it afterward by my mother, who had received her call from my grandmother in the same matter-of-fact tone my grandmother uses for everything, and who had spent the day after somewhat shaken by the gravity with which it had been delivered. I was included in the meeting, which I had not known until my grandmother called me directly the Thursday before to say she wanted me there as a professional resource. She used that phrase specifically, in case anyone had questions about the documents that required a technical answer. I want to describe the meeting, but I want to be careful about how I describe it because it was ultimately my grandmother's meeting and her decisions and her documents, and she is the one who had the authority in that room. I was present as a professional resource. I sat to my grandmother's left at her dining room table. The 5 children sat around the table. Constance was at the far end, which is the position she usually occupied in any setting involving Evelyn, adjacent to the head, close to authority. My grandmother had the document package in front of her, a tabbed binder prepared by Richard Holloway that she had reviewed thoroughly before the meeting because my grandmother reviews things thoroughly. She went through the trust structure in the methodical, patient way she explains things, which is the same way she taught me chess when I was 6 and Ava when she was 8, from first principles with no assumed knowledge, with room for questions at each stage. When she reached the distribution structure, she explained the changes she had made and the reasons for them, which she stated plainly. She had decided that the distribution should reflect her current assessment of where support was most needed and most likely to produce something good in the world, rather than a structure that had been built on assumptions about seniority that she had decided she no longer agreed with. When she reached the section about Ava's endowment, she read the name aloud. The Ava Sandoval Mercer Educational Endowment, $100,000. She said she had established it because her great-granddaughter was one of the most remarkable young people she had ever known, and because that was not something that had been said loudly enough or formally enough by the people around her, and she intended to correct that. Constance's expression during this section of the meeting is not something I will describe in specific detail because I have made a decision about what kind of story I want this to be. What I will tell you is that the silence in the room after my grandmother read Ava's endowment aloud had a specific quality, the quality of a recalibration, the sound a room makes when a power structure that everyone in it has been operating around has been formally and irrevocably revised. I looked at the tabbed binder in front of my grandmother. I looked at the document that Richard Holloway had prepared correctly with no errors because my grandmother had asked me informally if I knew his work and I had said it was meticulous. I thought about Ava in the car asking me if she had done something wrong. I thought about her hands around the Barnes and Noble gift card on Christmas Eve, the careful neutrality of her face while 12 people sat in a room and watched her be told she was small. I did not feel triumphant. I felt the specific, even satisfaction of a record that has been set straight, the same satisfaction I feel at the end of a well-documented fraud case when the documents say what the situation actually was and the situation is corrected accordingly. I told Ava about the endowment the evening after the family meeting at the kitchen table after dinner, when the day had settled enough that the information could land in the right place. I put my grandmother's letter in front of her. My grandmother had written a personal letter to Ava that accompanied the legal document, 3 pages in her handwriting on her personal stationery, which said things I will not quote because they were between a great-grandmother and a great-granddaughter and they are not mine to share. I watched Ava read the letter. She read slowly, the way she reads everything. When she finished, she sat with the letter in her hands for a long moment and did not say anything, and I did not say anything because the moment did not need words added to it. Then she folded the letter carefully and set it on the table, and she said very quietly, "She came to my presentation, didn't she?" She was not asking. She had deduced it from something my grandmother had written, because Ava deduces things. My grandmother had, without telling me, attended Ava's presentation at the Regional STEM Educators Showcase in March, had driven herself at 79 from Plano to Austin, and had sat in the third row, and Ava had not known she was there until she was reading a handwritten letter at a kitchen table 3 weeks later. I said yes. Ava picked up the letter again and held it and did not say anything else for a long time. There is a check, which is the thing in the title and the thing that requires explanation, because the number in the title is not the endowment number, and I want to be precise about where it came from. The check came at the family Easter gathering, 2 months after the February meeting, which was the first large family occasion after the estate amendments had been made known. The dynamics of the gathering were different from any I had attended in 38 years, which is what happens when the financial architecture of a family has been formally revised. Constance was present, the ambient authority that she had always occupied in family rooms, the authority that rested on the assumption about the future, was present in form only without its original weight. The way a position sounds different when the backing has changed. She had said nothing to me since the February meeting. She had said nothing to Ava. At Easter she came to me privately in my grandmother's kitchen while I was helping set the table, and she said she owed me an apology and she owed Ava an apology, and she wanted to give both of them correctly. I said I would give her the opportunity to speak to Ava, but that the opportunity was Ava's to take or leave. Constance said she understood. The conversation between Constance and Ava happened on the back porch of my grandmother's house, while the rest of the family was inside, and I was close enough to be present if needed and far enough away to give Ava the room to handle it as she chose. I heard Constance's voice and I heard Ava's voice, and the conversation lasted about 12 minutes and was, by every observable measure, conducted by Ava with the specific precision that she brings to everything that matters to her. She did not perform acceptance of the apology, she did not perform graciousness, she received what was said, she responded honestly to what she heard, and she closed the conversation when she had finished with it, not when it was convenient for Constance. After Constance went inside, Ava came and stood beside me at the porch railing. She said she apologized. I said, "I know," she said. I told her I appreciated that she said it. I asked if she meant it. She thought about this for a moment with the honest deliberation she applies to moral questions. She said, "I think so, I think she means it now, I just don't know what it would have taken for her to mean it earlier." I said that was a precise and honest answer. She said, "Yeah." We stood at the railing for a moment in the particular quiet that exists between two people who have been through something together and do not need to narrate it. The check came from my grandmother directly, delivered to Ava in a sealed envelope at the Easter table, placed at her setting before anyone arrived, in the manner of someone who had decided this was a private communication and not a performance. It was a personal check drawn on my grandmother's personal account, separate from the trust instrument and the endowment. The number had 6 figures. My grandmother had written on the memo line in her handwriting, "For whatever you build next." I know the number because Ava showed me, not with drama but with the specific quiet of someone who has been told something true about themselves in the only language that in our family on my grandmother's side has always been taken as fully irrevocably serious, the language of a document signed with a number on it. Ava looked at the check for a long time. Then she looked at me and said, "Does she know what I'm going to do with this?" I said, "She has a very good idea." Ava smiled, the Ava smile, which is small and specific and entirely genuine. She said, "Good." She folded the check and put it in her pocket and ate her Easter dinner with the settled composure of a person who has been correctly assessed. I want to say something about what the February meeting and everything that followed did to the family structure, because I think the honest answer is more complicated than the satisfying narrative might suggest. The family is not repaired. It is reorganized around an honest accounting of itself, which is different from repaired. Constance and I speak at family occasions with the civil accuracy of two people who know each other's positions completely and have decided that civil accuracy is what the situation requires and nothing more. My mother is relieved, I think, in the way that people are relieved when something that has been ambient and unacknowledged is finally said plainly, even if the saying of it is uncomfortable. Raymond has been exactly himself throughout, which means slightly outside the drama and genuinely interested in whether everyone can get to a workable equilibrium. Dolores called me a week after the meeting and said she had always thought someone needed to say something to Constance and was sorry she hadn't been the one to do it. I told her that wasn't quite what had happened, but I appreciated the call. Constance has not changed entirely because people do not change entirely. What has changed is the architecture behind the authority, and when the architecture changes, the authority sits differently. She is still the oldest. She is still the one who sends the family calendar invitations and organizes the Christmas Eve gift exchange. She is still at family tables the person who speaks first about the things she believes she has expertise in. But the specific weight that backed those positions, the assumption of what was coming, the unspoken financial authority of the person who believes they stand between everyone else and what they will eventually need, that weight is different now. It does not press the same way. The room is not the same room because the documents have changed, and documents, when they have been done correctly, change the rooms they govern. What I have said to Ava and what I mean in full is this: the thing Constance said at Christmas was not about Ava. It was never about Ava. It was about a person who had spent 20 years organizing her sense of authority around an assumption of what she was worth to the people she stood above, and who directed that authority at the people around her in proportion to how much she needed to believe the assumption was correct. Ava, who was quiet and did not perform for rooms and had a project that required her to sit with a computer for hours, and had precisely zero interest in working a crowd of people she had not chosen to be in a room with, Ava was the most visible refutation of the premise on which Constance's authority rested. Smart, serious, building things, requiring nothing from a room except honest engagement from the people in it. You do not tell a child that their internal life is a liability because you are worried about the child. You tell them that because the child's internal life is evidence against something you have needed to believe about the world. Ava is currently in her third summer at the Texas Young Scholars Program. She completed the UT Austin Computational Mathematics Fellowship in July, and the faculty supervisor, a professor named Dr. Anand Krishnamurthy, who runs the Applied Data Systems Lab, submitted a brief write-up of her work to an undergraduate research journal. She is 17 now, which means there is a college application on the horizon, and the conversation about it that she and I have been having is one of the better conversations of my life because she is applying the same thing to the question of her future that she applies to everything, which is, what does the data say and what do I want to build? The endowment is invested. The check has been deposited into an account she opened herself at Austin Community Credit Union, which she chose because she had researched the fee structures of 8 institutions and determined it had the best combination of no monthly fees, high-yield savings rates, and accessible ATMs. My grandmother was delighted when I told her. I want to tell you what my grandmother said to me the last time I visited her in Plano because it is the sentence that locates this whole thing correctly. We were at the kitchen table, me with coffee and her with the tea she has switched to in the evenings, Bigelow green tea, from the box in the cabinet above the microwave, which she has had there since I was a child and which will apparently be there forever. She asked about Ava's research fellowship. I told her about Dr. Krishnamurthy's write-up and about the journal submission. She was quiet for a moment in the satisfied way she is quiet when something has gone correctly. Then she said, the problem with quiet people is that the people who need rooms full of noise don't know how to read them. I said, no. She said, Constance has always needed noise to know something was real. I said, I know. She said, your daughter doesn't need that. I said, no, she doesn't. My grandmother picked up her Bigelow tea and took a careful sip and said, good, noisy people are expensive. And I sat in my grandmother's kitchen and thought about Ava at 17 building things that were real and requiring nothing from a room except the honest company of people who knew how to read the quiet. I thought about a data visualization tool built on MIT OpenCourseware, a fellowship invitation, an educational endowment with a name on it. I thought about the folder in my home office with the tabbed dividers and the cover page that said, a factual record. I thought about what it meant to build the record of the real when the real had been quietly extraordinary all along and simply needed someone to document it correctly. That is what the situation required. I documented it. The documents did what documents do when they are properly assembled. They made the truth visible in a form that the people who needed to see it could not look away from. Ava called me the week after the research fellowship ended, from her dorm room at UT Austin where she had been staying for the summer placement. She called on a Tuesday evening, which is when we always talk if we have been apart. She said the fellowship had been the best 8 weeks of her life. She said Dr. Krishnamurthy had asked if she would consider applying to his lab's undergraduate research program when she began her freshman year. She said she had told him she would consider it, which is Ava's way of saying yes while preserving the precision of her own timeline. She said the lab used Python and R and that she had spent most of the summer in Python, which she knew already but had learned R from scratch in the first 2 weeks because the lab's data structures required it, and because she had decided she was going to be competent at everything the lab needed her to be competent at before anyone had to ask. She said this last thing with the casual completeness of someone reporting something self-evident, as if learning a programming language in 2 weeks in order not to be behind was the obvious response to finding yourself in a new professional environment, which for Ava it was. I sat on my end of the phone and listened to my daughter describe 8 weeks of being exactly herself in a place that was designed for exactly that, and I thought about a 16-year-old on Christmas Eve with a $25 gift card and the carefully neutral expression of a child absorbing cruelty as if it were information. The distance between those two moments is the whole story. It is also a distance Ava traveled entirely on her own ability, pointed in the right direction by a grandmother who drove from Plano to Austin at 79 years old to sit in the third row and watch her great-granddaughter present something she had built from scratch, and by a folder on a kitchen table that said, here is the factual record, here is what is actually true, here is the quiet person documented correctly, read it. Constance has not said anything to me about Christmas since the apology to Ava at Easter. I do not expect her to. The apology was correct and it was given and it was received with the honest precision that Ava applies to everything, and what exists between them now is the civil, careful distance of two people who have said the true things and have arrived at a working understanding of what the relationship actually is rather than what one of them spent years insisting it should be. I think that is the best outcome available, and I think my grandmother knew it was the best outcome available, which is why she did not wait for Constance to correct herself but instead changed the documents and let the documents speak. Documents speak a language that families sometimes cannot. They say this is what is real, this is what is recorded, this is what exists regardless of what any one person has been insisting in the meantime. That is the language I have spoken professionally for 11 years. It turned out to be the right language for this. The folder is in the drawer of my home office behind the current client files, in the place I keep the closed cases that I have not wanted to throw away because the record in them represents something that cost something to build. The folder has a cover page. The cover page says Assessment of Ava Sandoval, age 16, a factual record compiled January. What it does not say, because folders do not say this kind of thing, is this is the person Constance called Small. This is the person my grandmother drove 4 hours round trip at 79 years old to watch present a research project. This is the person who learned R in 2 weeks because the lab needed it. This is the person who deposited a 6-figure check into an account she chose herself after researching 8 institutions' fee structures. This is the quiet one. This is what the quiet one was doing all along, in the rooms where people who needed noise were busy being unable to read her. The folder does not say any of that, it just holds the documents. The documents say everything else. That is what they have always been for.